before jumping into some of our conversation, we would love for you to read a passage from your book to introduce it to the audience, and then we'll chat a little bit more.
Okay, absolutely. It felt appropriate to me because you all love music so much and y'all have so many uh, deep, meaningful conversations about the role of music in the culture and the way that culture interacts then with music, that I wanted to write about something that I found surprising as it related to hip hop and the crack epidemic. So I have the book here. Look at her. She thick.
Yes.
Look at
Look
listen,
at her.
it's a hardback. You know,
That's
you
a
get that hardback with the yeah.
that's a big baby right there.
Absolutely. Uh-huh. So this is from the 38th section, if you could imagine that, and from the chapter called Intervention. And it begins like this. According to a 2006 study published in the Journal of Sociology and Social Welfare, since the early 1990s, inner city youths have been purposefully avoiding crack and heroin, having seen the devastation these drugs brought into the lives of older community members. Researchers by the US Department of Justice looking specifically at the epidemic in New York City backed that notion. This is a quote here. Ethnographic evidence suggests that the crack epidemic in New York City entered decline around 1990 when youth began to disdain crack use, found one report by the agency. They considered crackhead a dirty word and even took to abusing crackheads. Such a change in attitudes among youths heralded the beginning of the decline phase of the crack epidemic. It's hard to overstate the significance of hip hop in this shift. The culture was blasted by the mainstream for its vulgarity, gangster rap in particular. Just a cursory look at some of the most prominent popular albums and songs reveal, however, an anti crack theme that emerged in the late 1980s and continued on through the end of the epidemic in the mid 90s. New Jack City, Boys in the Hood, and Jungle Fever, all released in 1991, depict the horrors of the crack epidemic. Written and directed by young Black filmmakers, these films were hip hop in style, tone, and subject matter. Barry Michael Cooper, the journalist behind Spin Magazine's Big Crack feature in 1986, wrote New Jack City. The film depicted the rise and fall of a charismatic Harlem drug lord named Nino Brown. Boys in the Hood, written and directed by John Singleton, took on the violence of the crack era. Spike Lee's Jungle Fever depicted the turmoil crack created within families. After these films, there followed a slew of others: Juice in 1992, Menace to Society in 1993, Clockers in 1995. Just like the media messaging of the Just Say No era, these films all had anti violence, anti drug messages at their core. But what set them apart in true hip hop fashion was their commitment to centering the stories of those who've been marginalized in the PSAs and made for TV movies of the 80s. As such, they became cult classics among young people of color and helped shape their perceptions of crack use and dealing. Rap was also deeply engaged with the crack epidemic and the war on drugs. At the time, a common retort from rappers to criticism of their lyrics was that they were merely reflecting the reality of the streets. It was dismissed by some as an excuse, but when it comes to crack, they were telling the truth. As crack use increased throughout the 80s, so did the release of rap songs warning users of its consequences. Kumo D released Monster Crack in 86. Then in 1987, NWA released Dope Man. MC Shan dropped Jane, Stop This Crazy Thing, and Boogie Down Productions released Say No Brother, Crack Attack, Don't Do It the following year. Public Enemy released Night of the Living Bassheads. NWA dropped Fuck the Police, and Slick Rick released Hey Young World. Then there were other anti-crack hits: BDP's Self-Destruction, Gimme No Crack by Shinehead, Just Say No by Young MC, Slow Down by Brand Nubian, Notorious B.I.G.'s Everyday Struggle. These songs did not glamorize drugs as many rap critics claimed. On the contrary, they were practically uniform in their opposition. Moreover, they were hits, played in heavy rotation by the young people who would ultimately put an end to the epidemic the songs reflected. Now, this part here was really surprising to me, this that I was able to make this connection. More than any other individual rapper, Dr. Dre deserves recognition for the role he had in helping turn the page on the crack epidemic. As a member of NWA and producer for the group, he helped articulate the conditions of life in the ghetto on songs like Dope Man, Fuck the Police, and Gangsta Gangsta. Then in 1992, 3 years after leaving NWA, Dr. J dropped his magnum opus, The Chronic. The album is ranked by many, including Vibe, Spin, and Rolling Stone, as one of the greatest albums of all time. It also seems that during crack's decline, when a new generation was beginning its youthful experimentation, it presented an alternative to hard drugs. On it, Dr. Dre perfected his G-Funk sound, production marked by groovy bass lines, layered synthesizers, funk and soul samples. The album contrasts those sounds of a bygone era with lyrics exploring the issues of the day. Songs like The Day the Niggas Took Over, Little Ghetto Boy, and A Nigga with a Gun. These are all odes to street life during the crack era. More explicitly, Dre weaves documentary audio from the LA riots into intros and interludes throughout the chronic. On top of that, and this is the last part, I promise, Dr. Dre layers on an homage to marijuana. High Powered, the $20 Sack Pyramid, The Roach, Let Me Ride, and other tracks from the Chronic exalt the benefits of smoking weed. In fact, the album's title is a slang term for high-grade marijuana, and the art for its cover references the packaging for zigzag rolling papers. Now, why this is so interesting is that what we see in the research is the same year that Dr. Dre drops The Chronic is the year that you see a plateau of hard drug use among Black and Latino teenagers. But you also see at the same time a huge spike in weed use among those same people, suggesting that in a moment when young people were deciding that they were skeptical of crack, that they had seen the devastation that it was having in our communities, but they were still getting into recreational drug use, it offered a safer alternative that's actually now legalized in many places. So I think that, you can make a loose argument. Well, one, you can make a very strong argument that hip hop helped end the crack epidemic through its messaging, through its anti-crack messaging. But that somebody like Dr. Dre actually had a role in saying, if you're going to do drugs, don't do that, do this.
That's a very interesting tie-in. And J Ray and I, we had a very long discussion about that very topic, because it's kind of, because Dr. Dre is such a precarious character in hip hop, because of, on one hand, one might credit him for helping in the ending of the of drug use and crack use in the Black and brown communities through music, and on the other hand, he is a vilified character for his treatment of women in hip hop, period. So yes, that is a lot to be covered and a lot to be discussed. One movie that stood out to me was Lean on Me, starring Morgan Freeman. And the scene that stands out to me the most is when him and Smalls, I believe his name was, standing on the roof of the school. And he says, "Small, well, you smoke crack, don't you?" Talking to the young man in school. He's like, "Well, you smoke crack, don't you?" "Well, you're trying to kill yourself." I'm paraphrasing here. "That means you're trying to kill yourself." "Well, if you're going to kill yourself, don't fuck around with it. Do it expeditiously. Jump off of this building." And I remember, because I'm a young chunky kid myself, just feeling in that moment, well, I would never smoke crack, but still feeling like I had some kind of connection with Smalls, just because of the way he looked, because he kind of looked like me. And knowing how much impact that had on my life at the time, solidifying the fact that I would never want to touch crack myself. So I thought that was a very interesting point, and bringing that, and that brought it home to me at that point, that yes, there was so much anti-crack messaging in when we were growing up in the early 80s to the mid 90s, that it just kind of didn't make sense. But going back to the book, and one of the things that we found most interesting is the way you humanize the people that were taking crack. And that is something that we just do not and have not done as a community.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to bring that up as a community, and we'll talk more about that also with regards to some of our favorite artists.